Welcome here, everyone, to the Aftermath LPL Recap, here in English, of course, because good Lord knows I might look it, but I don't speak it, unfortunately. My name is Orbital. I will be the host of this podcast. With me is my good friends Ferris and Yanni. Unfortunately, Yanni fell asleep on us, so he will not be joining us. I joke, I kid, he is awesome, but he will be joining us in future recaps, as we are going to be covering every single week, hopefully from Stage 1 and onwards of the LPL 2025 season. Welcome in, Ferris. Tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself here.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be covering the LPL, the greatest of the four major regions, at least in my opinion, and hence the reason why we're here, right? We're trying to cover all the action. We're trying to break down everything that goes on. I'm Ferris. I am a play-by-play League of Legends shoutcaster, a little bit of color casting in there as well. Yanni and I have worked together when I've been a color caster, and Orbital, you as well. All three of us actually were covering Path to Pro together, so we've worked with each other in the past. We're all casters. We all do some cool stuff in esports, and yeah, I'm very happy to be here and happy that you guys brought me on board and ready to get started with episode 1 here this week.
Of course. And Yanni, of course, actually one of the casters for the LPL English side of things, has been running out, been able to cover these games live as well. Also a special guest on the LPL English broadcast outside of just casting it. So heavy influence and knowledge within the scene as well. So we got some experts in here, and hopefully in the future we'll have some more experts along the way as well. So for those of you tuning in at home, obviously this will be up on YouTube after every single week of the season, where we recap and also look forward to the predictions in the future of these matches. Of course, with the LPL, we call it Aftermath for a reason. It gets silly sometimes, but there are some amazing moments to be had every single week. So if you are interested in getting a little bit of a shout out yourself, if you want to ask us questions, we may be able to answer them in the following episodes. So always be there to comment down below or reach out to us on our socials, as you see, Orbital_casting, FerrisCast, and Yanni Cast along these social spheres. Right now, that is X. We'll have more socials in the future as well. To start things off, though, because this is week 1, Ferris, we got to talk about the entirety of the stages, starting with stage 1, where 16 teams play across 4 different groups in hopes to breach the top 2.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole shakeup of the format from previous years, and a lot of different major regions as well have shaked up their brackets and the way that they're actually carrying out their first split. It's now a 3-split system. Again, there's that first stand tournament that's coming up in Korea, and the winner of this LPL split will represent the LPL there when that time comes. But 4 groups based on the finish of the summer split last year in 2024. And so we got Group A, Group B, Group C, Group D. Top 2, they are going to move on from each group to the knockout stage. And then that knockout stage is a double elimination. Again, full fearless best of 5 series. So we're already getting as well in these group stages full fearless best of 5s. And I don't know about you, Orbital, but I absolutely love this change. I love best of 5s because you're getting a true sense of the teams when they match up against each other. And then you're also getting what's so important, and a big complaint over the last couple of years is the diversity in those picks when we do have that.
Of course, and there's also some drawbacks there, which of course we'll discuss in depth as we see more champions be picked and also just not picked. At the end of the day, the diversity pool itself may or may not shake out as we hope. We've had some discussions. I know a lot of analysts out there have stated, Fearless isn't all it's cracked up to be, mainly because we see the same bans come out, so the same prio of champions comes out game by game. But that is yet to be fully determined. A lot of leagues have gone ahead and moved to the Fearless side. With that being said, though, we have 16 amazing teams rounding out the LPL this time around. The teams that we are seeing are BLG, TES. Not only that, we also have AL, WE. I'm probably going to repeat some of these names. I do apologize. LGD, JDG, Weebu, OMG, UP, or UP, of course. We got LNG, EDG, IG, NIP, FPX, RNG, and I'm pretty sure I'm missing one more in there. My brain is not wanting to work with me here.
Yeah, and we got our groups. So Group A, of course, Anyone's Legend, Team We, Top Esports, LGD. And I guess we can kind of transition now into, I guess, our predictions here of what we actually hope to see, or what we think is going to happen here in these groups before we get into the matches that ended up happening this week. in week number 1. We'll start with Group A, Anyone's Legend, Team We, Top Esports, LGD. Now, I think it's clear, especially because Demacia Cup as well has just passed. Anyone's Legend, Top Esports, they were the finalists of Demacia Cup. Anyone's Legend taking that series 3-1. So I think it's pretty easy to say Top Esports, Anyone's Legend. They're likely the ones that I think are going to be moving on to the next round at the very least. Now, who's going to actually top the group is another question. I think just because of the veterancy on top, I mean, there's veterans on Anyone's Legend, but Top Esports, I think, has a little bit more firepower. They fell short in Demacia Cup, but I'm going with Top Esports and Anyone's Legend, with Top Esports taking up that number 1 spot. Group B, you got Weibo, you got JDG, who have assembled that. Well, I want to say super team, but Pays, Scout as well, joining the roster for this season as well. I get the full roster here, which I have in front of me. It's Alla, Shun, Scout, Pays missing. Super powerful team. They fell in the Demacia Cup. TT actually took their spot, but I think it's going to be Weibo. I think it's going to be JDG. Group C, I think it's going to be BLG. And I also think this might be my most controversial. Maybe not controversial because Thunder Talk has actually been doing really well, but I think it's going to be BLG and Thunder Talk. I think they're going to outbid LNG and EDG in Group C. And then I got to go with NIP and IG to make it out in Group D over RNG and FPX, because you got to go with this new IG roster. It's super exciting. And of course, Do and be back with Ninjas in Pajamas. We're going to see that matchup next week between those two teams. I got to go with those two.
It's so weird personally to see NIP here, by the way, because I personally know them as a European branch. So it's like I have seen them back in the Counter-Strike days. So it's very fun to see them here. But of course, as you said, we are still waiting to see exactly how that's going to shape out and how well it's going to play out as well throughout the regular season. Honestly, Yanni, he's asleep, but he sleep talked to me throughout earlier. He's making sure to rest up for his broadcast. By the way, if you are watching this on Friday, you can tune in this coming Saturday to Yanni, I believe, on the broadcast for Saturday's matchup, because this is coming out a little bit of a day early. We'll speak to that a little bit later as well. For his predictions, though, he did want me to tell you in Group A, pretty much through Group D, he is actually on the same wavelength as you, Ferris. So that is actually quite surprising. Normally, we do see some variations, some irregulations when it comes to the prediction, to some of those ideas. And so I kind of want to bring it to your attention. I want to ask you, are there any dark horses that you are watching? Not specifically, obviously, in Group A. Group A, unfortunately, it feels that one's pretty much solidified. You got the top 2 from the Demacia Cup. You're like, yeah, that's it. Where do we see some shakeups possibly in Group C and D? Because I know you had a little bit hesitation in there.
Yeah, in Group C more specifically, with Thunder Talk, again, go back to Demacia Cup, they weren't expected to get out of, I don't remember which group it was in terms of the numerical group, but TT and JDG were in the same group. TT actually ended up beating JDG and moving on. And a lot of people in the community, especially in the LPL Revival Discord, I think that's Hysterics who's organized all that, everyone was saying LNG was going to win in the best of 5, and of course we'll get into that matchup later, but it ended up being Thunder Talk. And but now, dark horse, compared to my prediction, I think LNG could definitely sneak in there, grab up a win against EDG. I mean, they do still have to face BLG later on, who I think is arguably the best team in the LPL. So with Thunder Talk already having that win over them, I mean, I guess I could say LNG could potentially be that dark horse in Group C. And I think we have to mention RNG in Group D as well. The fact that, Milky Way is on this team. He was loaned to FPX last year for the summer split and had probably one of the most impressive summer split rookie beginnings of any player, one of the best all time, I would say. Is so absolutely talented, was putting that team on his back, playing all of those carry champions. So RNG with a player like Milky Way, a lot of young talent on that team. Maybe if a team like Ninjas in Pajamas doesn't gel together right off the start, off the hop, and they start to have some hiccups early on, we could potentially see RNG in the knockouts. Those are my dark horse predictions.
Oh, okay. Yanni, unfortunately, slept through that part of the class, so we will not get his predictions until later, with also more information with us as well, which is, to me, going to be very interesting as we see these first 2 weeks shake out. Remember, matches every single evening. For us, at least, you and I, we're sitting here in the USA. We are watching, or close to, we are watching these matches at like 3 a.m., which is the best part of it all. So let's go ahead and run down what we did see back at the start of the season. That was about 6 days ago on our time side here. It was WBG versus OMG. This one, it feels, shook out about as expected. This week was a lot of I told you so moments, it feels like.
Yeah, and this Weibo team is, of course, much better in terms of star power than the OMG roster. For OMG, we got it's kind of a mouthful here. We got Harry, Hang, Linfeng, Starry, and Moham. It's Harry, Hung, Linfeng. Moham coming over from Damwon Kia, who had a pretty solid performance, I would say, for someone so new to the scene over at Worlds. But going up against a roster like Weibo's, they have Breathe and Xiaohu and Light from last season, and they were bringing on in, as I look at the Weibo roster here, it's in front of me, Tian from Top Esports and Hong as well from LNG. This is a really good team. This is a team that can compete for the very top, could potentially be a dark horse to win the entire LPL if they end up performing. So a 3-0, which was the result, I don't think was a surprise in anyone's mind. Now, there was a little bit of scary moments there for Weibo, especially in that game number 3. OMG had a pretty good start. Weibo was kind of throwing their lives around a little bit. Xiaohu's Silas in particular was a little bit sus, making some pretty interesting plays. But I think Tian and Xiaohu are going to be an absolute powerhouse mid jungle duo. I think they showed that in this series. They also played another match this week, which we'll get into later. But yeah, OMG simply couldn't hang. Weibo, they got the star power. It's the first game of the season. OMG still probably building up a little bit of that steam. And then talking about Otacon as well, good teams like Weibo, once they get that buff, they get the feats of strength. This is a really snowbally season, especially around that mid game when Otacon comes onto the map. And we saw a lot of that in this series. So I think it was pretty expected here with that 3-0, and Weibo had a pretty solid opening to their season with that one.
We're not even touching on the fact that plate changes came into this as well. We saw we saw the changes where top and mid are going to be
Yeah.
falling much earlier as well, and it's a rush for those early objectives. You think about it, you get first blood plus a tower, and all of a sudden that Otacon looks like an even larger buff on top of it. It's just wild how some of these early games are going to be shaking out, which I like the fact that you pointed out that OMG might be building steam. As you said, in game 3 they started looking a little bit better and willing to move into that engagement. I think that's where a lot of teams are going to have a difficult time. It's shifting almost that mentality. Now, granted, in the LPL and across a lot of the eastern regions, they are willing to fight. Don't get me wrong, they're more than willing to fight. So we just have to see that come out of them. They drafted, it sounds fairly well, and I think they did. But again, they got to be willing to commit. And I think Yanni said about the same thing. Very impressed as you were as well. Xiaohu, crazy game number 1, 47% damage share in there, and continued kind of that spree throughout the series. So very, very fun there. Moving on to day number 2, it was LNG versus Thunder Talk, and this one just it feels good to go ahead and hear that TT is already sitting there like, look, we did well before and we surprised people. We're gonna try and keep surprising and still showing up, even at the start of the week.
And the most impressive part for me about Thunder Talk, they don't have the most impressive lineup when it comes to individual talent. They have players like, well, their roster is Hoya, Beishwan, Saytab, 1XN, and Feather. So a couple new people to the scene, a couple of people who've had a couple of seasons but have never really been super impressive. But when they've been team fighting, that's really been where this team has excelled. And what's really going to be important this season when we go back to Otacon, because one team fight really dictates the entire pace of the mid to late game. It was like that with Baron, now even more so, especially when Voracious Otacon and Baron are live at the same time. And this is just going to be a theme for every single matchup we cover for this week. That is a scenario that we're seeing game in and game out, no matter who's playing. But Thunder Talk, we're team fighting really, really well. Especially impressed with Hoya in this series as well. Was struggling a little bit. There was a Renekton Gnar matchup that they were struggling in. They were getting ganked, and he was dying a whole lot, but still able to make an impact. Had a really impressive Poppy performance as well. Big Keeper's Verdicts to knock way away from the Baron pit so they could secure a Baron. Big heroic charges to lock down key targets in those team fights and bring out those wins. So I like the performance from Hoya, who's kind of like an unsung hero, and I really like Saytab and 1XN. These are two players who I feel can really blossom into some powerhouse players and kind of the future of the LPL. Maybe. I might be getting ahead of myself, but I hold a lot of promise for TT. And I think they showed out in this series as well. They lost the first game. LNG came out strong. A little bit of a draft gap, but then, they bounced back and they pulled out the 3-1 win. So I think that was very impressive and a great start for TT.
I think one of the big things that you mentioned is Hoya in there, and I want to circle back to that because even Yanni was saying the exact same thing. Is if we weren't looking at raw stats specifically, Hoya might have been in there for MVP overall. I mean, very
Yeah.
very strong, and just again, it's one of the reasons that we sit here and go, look, you just can't look at the stats. Stats can be skewed sometimes. The impact that a single player can have can be felt even without the numbers in there. So Hoya definitely getting a lot of love there, and as you said, game number 4 it puts a lot of promise, and that's what we look at in week ones. How well did they shape up in the preseason versus now as well, and how far can you run with your predictions on top of it just as easily? So, of course, that was Thunder Talk and LNG. Moving on to the third match, which this one, of course, was fun to watch for. RNG versus FPX. RNG opening up with a 3-1 over FPX.
And this is, again, these are the two teams who, well, in Group D, we predict, or at least I predict, that IG, Ninjas in Pajamas, with the rosters that they've accrued for themselves, should probably top this group. So it's a meetup between the bottom two teams, of course, getting a win over a team that might be in that bottom 3-4 portion of this 4-person group or 4-team group. Definitely going to be huge. So RNG picked this one up. FPX, they came out strong with a game 1 win, and it was a stomp. FPX really had no resistance there. RNG kind of just fell flat. They lost all objectives, and it looked like if this is what's going to set the tone for the series, then it's just going to be an absolute landslide. But RNG, they ended up bouncing back. They had some pretty good games themselves. And again, 3-1 series, we haven't had any series go 5 games, but this is a close one. And again, it all happens really around Otacon and who is able to secure this objective and actually push their advantage with it. Although I think of any of the two teams this time around, these two teams might have used Otacon a little bit less effectively as the other teams. There weren't a lot of forced fights, a little bit hesitant to actually pull the trigger when they had that GA revive, since Voracious Otacon is almost always. I didn't even think we got a single Ruinous Otacon at all this week. So these teams felt like they were a little bit behind when it came to that sense of urgency there. A couple of throws around Barons, especially FPX, in game number 4, they looked really shaky with their decision making. And RNG, they fought a little bit better, and they bounced back to get that, not that reverse sweep, but after a really rough game 1, similar to Thunder Talk in the previous series, they pulled out 3 wins in a row. So it's a really big win for RNG. If they can keep that momentum up, maybe steal a win against NIP and IG. Again, this is not double round robin. This is single round robin. So you play only one, you play the team once, and if you win, you win. So one more win in RNG, they could be contenders here for Group D. So it's pretty exciting here to see that dynamic.
And I think that's also a big factor considering what we've seen in 2024. RNG did not look as they haven't looked that great over the last year. And so to see them actually rise back up and take this chance with the new season format, this could be the big shakeup even further along, even into stage 2, which we might talk about later on down the road. How do you think this RNG squad stacks up after 2024 season, which again, they failed to make it into a few of the playoff spots, and they just did not have a good session. Granted, there's still a lot of people that are putting them at the bottom of this group stage, but I mean, with that win, it already kind of blew past some of the ideas that a lot of the analysts had, and in such a good factor. Or do you think that this is just a win because it was against FPX, that it was against one of the other seeds that a lot of people didn't have the super high expectations for?
I think it's a little, yeah, I think it is more just because they did play against this FPX roster that, again, is not very strong, but it's nice to build that confidence here. And they did show some pretty good signs. I think the one thing about this year in LPL is there's not a lot of rollover in die games. There's a couple that happened this week, but a lot of them, again, circling back to Otacon, it's really coming around that mid game in those fights. And these teams, whichever teams can team fight the best, are really going to be able to pull out strong results. And I think both teams were fighting in the series. Again, really, really close. So RNG, keep working on that team fighting. Again, a player like Milky Way, we know of the potential that this player can fulfill, kind of spearheading this team there on those carry champions that played the Karthus, and the Viego as well. The loss came on the Viego, but can be a very impactful player. I think they could surprise. So I'm not counting them out. I do think that their 3-1 did come from the fact that FPX is a little bit weaker in this group. But I do think that, if IG is sleeping, if NIP is sleeping, If they come out flat, if they underestimate them, then there is definitely opportunity for RNG as that dark horse, like I predicted, to actually be able to pick up some wins and shape up to be
Yep.
a team that could compete, because we didn't expect FPX last year to compete either. And, a team ducked on Milky Way, Shawalahu, and Care, they did it. So at least they were up there in that top four for at least a little bit. So I would say it's possible.
There's always a possibility. I think when it comes to the LPL, there's always a possibility. It's how
Oh
well can
yeah.
you grasp that possibility? And so I
Mhm.
100% agree. We are looking at teams that are showing promise, but you got to step up to the big dogs. You can't be taking that one step. You got to be taking that 5 to 7 if you really want to take over. Looking into the next match, I believe it was Weeaboo Gaming versus Ultra Prime. This one setting up to be again, a little bit understood, but Ultra Prime actually stepping up with a game of their own, so not exactly just kind of rolling over, as you were talking about, not too many full rollover games.
It was game two that Ultra Prime ended up winning out. Weibo took the first one. I was really impressed with Rosie Love's Nico. So that's the support for Ultra Prime. A lot of huge engages, especially around a pivotal Drake fight, finding 4 people in the Pop Blossom. The Callista Nico bot lane combination I've been loving to watch here in the LPL. It's so funny. It's really effective. And again, coming back to team fighting, that team fighting prowess there with that pick is what allowed Ultra Prime to actually pick up a win against Weibo, who we've built up to be one of the better teams in the LPL. But then it just became too much there in game three, game four. Even game one, close game, kind of got blown up around Otacon and Baron, and Weibo did a pretty good job of being able to push their leads and everything. But Ultra Prime, let's take a look at this team here and re-look at that roster. I think Saber very much struggled in the mid lane up against Xiaohu, was gapped, especially in the game that Ultra Prime ended up winning on the Silas into the Victor matchup. Xiaohu really had his way there. So a little bit of room for improvement there. But yeah, I mean, this team, not a whole lot of expectations. The fact they were able to take off a game shows a little bit of promise. I liked the performance from Rosie Love. We'll see more from him and if they can blossom into the future. But yeah, 3-1 victory for Weibo Gaming. Pretty dominant and pretty solid. And I think Tian and Xiaohu, once again, going back to that mid jungle conversation, the game number 3, Ari Pantheon Tian, absolute masterclass, enabled Xiaohu so well. And those two absolutely took over the game. And it's a really big testament to Weibo as well, because it can be Tian and Xiaohu as a mid jungle duo to take over. It can be Breathe as well, who plays the champions like Ambessa and had a good performance on Ambessa in game one. And it can also be Light as well, who we know can be a very big force and probably one of the most underrated marksman players in the entirety of the LPL. So I have high hopes for Weibo. They're starting out 2-0. Ultra Prime again, they fall to a pretty strong team. We'll see if they can bounce back. But I think it was a pretty expected result. And Weibo's always been hovering around that bottom of the top. Maybe this is the year that they can move up towards that real upper echelon. So I'm excited for Weibo. Probably a team I'm anticipating the most just because of the hot start that they've had.
Well, the thing is they've already anticipated and shown up. They've already gotten 2 wins under the belt. We talked about the
Yeah.
2 matches so far, which means that they pretty much cleared the hurdle, right? And we're talking about the single elimination status. It means that they can basically wipe the sweat from their forehead and say we're good. They've already
Yep.
sat with that 2-0, and it's a very comfortable 2-0, even with a 6-1 game record, which is beautiful to say the least. So very, very comfortable for them. I am, as you said, looking forward to it to see what more they can do in the future. If they are going to step up as the first seed or second seed, still yet to be determined. But of course, that'll be all played out. Moving into I want to say the not so nice moments of the tail end days here. We had a couple back-to-back 3-0s, starting with AL versus LGD. This one again, as expected. I don't think too much needs to be said about this. It was the Demacia Cup guys just stepping up and saying, "Look, we showed what we could do before the season started. We're showing it one more time."
And honestly, of all the 3-0s, I think this was the 3-0. There's like a whole thing where, a whole 5-game series can actually be less close than a 3-0, or a 3-0 can be closer than a 5-game series. Just depends on how the games go. The games were pretty close. I mean, game 2 was an absolute fist fight in the mid game, and then a big throw around Otacon for LGD, which kind of sealed the L there for them. And AL gets that voracious Otacon buff and then goes absolutely crazy with that. And then the game 3 seemed like it was a done deal for anyone's legend where they were just absolutely stomping the early game. And I just forget it's LPL. It's even at 15 minutes after it was like a 7-0 start in the
Yep.
kill score. It ended up going a whole 43 minutes, the entire distance there for the win for anyone's legend. But I mean, this LGD roster, along with Ultra Prime, along with OMG, even FPX, they're kind of in that category as the one that has all the new players, a couple players from the LDL, and players that haven't really been able to prove themselves completely or have that full time to blossom in the LPL. So again, probably not going to be a team that moves on in this group, but they were fighting against anyone's legend, Demacia Cup champions. That's the beauty about the LPL. Again, I'll go back to that point. There's no rollover in die games, or at least very rare. They're fighting to the death, and it's bloody. So I liked that coming through from LGD. And I think if I were to give maybe my or my MVP for the LGD side, or at least the one that impressed me the most, I think it was Climber in the jungle. Set up pretty well there, impressed me a lot. So I liked Climber, and I'm excited to see more from LGD, I guess, just to see if they can turn those really close games into maybe a win, turn a series into a 3-1, maybe take it to a whole 5-game series, or even upset one of the better teams
Ooh,
in the
all
future.
right. Ooh, I like it. I like it. I like it. Listen, yeah, we got to give some room for improvement across the season. Now, unfortunately, some teams have a lot more time than others to be able to develop that talent across the pool, and so we'll see. But I do like the fact that I know you said it was close, but I will always sit there and say, anyone's legend, the squad that won out in the cup before, is just like, I hate saying it. When I watched them, it also felt like they were messing around a little bit too much, and it's just like one of those moments
Yeah.
where you just like, as much as we want to say it's close, you sit there and go, they could have reined it back. They could have reined it back and said, okay, we're going to watch this out. But again, week ones, I always feel it's good to mess around with it. So I love seeing that the carefree, I say. The coaches probably say differently. But I do love the fact that anyone's legend are still also scoping out the season to an extent. There's a lot of irregularities when it comes to this. A lot of people still finding, sometimes, of course, some small nuances that are still coming up. But granted, LPL, I'm sure will find every single one of them. Finally, of course, because this is the final one before the Saturday matchup, we are taking a look at one more, which is BLG versus EDG, and BLG did not disappoint.
No, this one was, I gave LGD the benefit of the doubt there, saying, okay, and you made a good point there where it's like, okay, anyone's legend probably experimenting a little bit too much, not taking that seriously as they would maybe as if they were playing against someone of a higher caliber. But this series, BLG versus EDG, this one really was not close. The early games, you know, it feels like EDG, they're there. They have some kills, they make a couple plays, the gold's even, maybe they're only down 1,000 gold, but you're never sitting here saying EDG has control over this game. And BLG is playing these champions at scale. BLG, how good they are at team fighting is going to be able to turn it on, especially once Otacon comes around, once the big Drake fights come around. That's exactly what we saw in this game. I mean, Knight performed like an absolute monster. Game one on the Corki was insane. Vladimir as well in game two, and pulled out the Swain in game three, which was crazy. I'm going to try and take a look at here at these team compositions. So Swain, Vladimir, and Corki for Knight, an absolute monster performance. I think I missed talking about the tank Jace as well
Oh no,
in the
don't do this
previous
to me.
series,
Don't do
because
this to me.
Flandre's tank
Don't you dare.
Jace actually converted me in that last series against LGD. I
No.
hated this pick.
No.
I hated it, but it's actually strong because these tank items are just so OP, dude. They give you so much value and you deal damage while taking no damage, and it works. I mean, if it didn't work, then not every single top laner would be playing it, but every top laner is
Fair.
playing it. Ben played it,
Ferris,
and Ben
I'm
popped
gonna
off.
stop you
Dude,
right now.
I got to
I'm gonna
vouch. I got to
stop you
vouch for
right
it.
now only because I have PTSD from the last time NA tried to integrate a Jace play Sal into our own area. It did not work out. I have very, very bad memories of that. Still though,
Well,
keep
this
going.
one's kind of foolproof though, because you got the resistances. If you make one mistake, it isn't necessarily over for you. So this might
How many
be
mistakes do you
the
think NA makes?
NAJ's
Come on,
build.
man. Don't bring this in right now. Oh no, but still, it is very true. Tank J's coming out with style here. BLG still showing up very, very big, in a big way. For EDG, is there any way for them to really have a way back, in my opinion? Because we're looking at EDG, and it's just like unfortunately, as predicted by Yanni, sitting at the bottom of the standings there, just not looking that great. Do we see any glimpses of life from them?
Well, they did get their theoretical toughest opponent out of the way. Although I do think TT and LNG are very much hovering around that same level. I think we saw a close series between those two. And I think Edward Gaming is clearly below that level. So I don't expect them to have any type of miracles here. Their roster isn't the strongest. They have veteran pieces like Angel, even Wink, who's had a couple of seasons in the LPL, actually did play AD carry a long time ago, role swapped to support, was playing on Invictus Gaming for a little bit. And Angel didn't play bad. I think Angel had a couple of good moments here in the series, but again, I think they're truly outmatched. I think this is one of the more lopsided groups in terms of the top three and then the bottom fourth person. I think Edward Gaming is the clear bottom here, where it's like FPX and RNG over in Group D. They're hitting each other hard. LGD versus Team Wii might be a battle for 3 and 4. Ultra Prime, Oh My God, and OMG. But yeah, I don't think so. I think Edward Gaming, I'm not really convinced on this roster. Maybe they'll surprise me. And again, anything's possible. Like we said, this is the LPL. But can I see it happening? Probably not. And, you know, it's kind of a crushing game to start your season off to against BLG. So who knows where their mental state's at, but it's not looking good.
Yeah, that's always the rough part to think about. And honestly, I don't doubt it. I could see them maybe having some shining moments, but at the same time, it's just that shining moments at the end of the day. It was a matchup that we knew BLG was going to take very, very well, and hopefully they continue on their run in the next week's games, as we'll see them a little bit further out. But with that being said, we run through all of our matches and seen, as we said, the early starts to the week showing a lot of 3-0s, a lot of interesting moments there. And I want to get your thoughts here because, as you said, we talked about all this, but it does feel like the meta has still shaken out to a meta stance. How do you feel the hard fearless draft, as the LPL will call it? How do you feel it's shaken up so far? Has it met expectations as of yet?
Well, I honestly, I like it a lot. I was very much vouching for it at the start of the podcast. And what I think it does is when there was no fearless draft, in every role, the way I see it in a pro meta is there's about 4 to 5 viable picks, maybe more, depending. Like sometimes jungle has a whole lot of viable picks. But given on typical situations that end up panning out in a program, you're going to end up playing 3 or 4 champions, and it's kind of like pick your poison, which one looks like the best here. I feel like we're seeing a lot of that too in the fearless draft, except instead of which one should I pick, it's kind of like, okay, we've played 3 games, I've played these 3 best champions, now it's time to pull this out. I especially see that in the 80 carry role, where we're seeing MF cycled every game, we're seeing a Callista Nico bot lane every single game, we're seeing a Varus game, Ash Braum is coming through, everyone's picking up the Ambessa in the top lane, the Nars, the Renekton. So I feel like we're just getting to see more of those meta picks rather than just getting, you know, the Victor every game and this champion's banned, like Skarner's banned every single game. So we're always going to get this pick in the jungle. It increases that variability in the picks, but again, I think it's been pretty relatively predictable. But I've liked the new picks that have emerged in the meta. Things like the Vladimir mid, the Pantheon jungle has been really fun as well. I think Tion had a fantastic performance on that, and we saw a unique pick this morning, like Swain from Knight, which I think was fun. So honestly, even though there is a lot of the same stuff that's keep regurgitating itself in certain game states, there is more opportunities for those niche picks because those meta picks are taken off the board. So there is still that predictability, but we've seen some pretty cool stuff. So I like it. The meta has been pretty fun. And yeah, I've liked what we've been seeing. A lot of carry picks in different roles. It's not just a hard carry jungle meta, not just a hard mid carry meta, not just full utility on AD carry. There's a lot of different things you can look for.
Of course, I know some people on the LPL English side of things were also discussing the fact that it felt like ADC was one of the most pinched roles so far. It just felt like it was very difficult to get a true AD, meaning a lot of these bot laners are going to have to fluctuate towards those APs, and that might be a test for a lot of these teams to figure out and be able to work around. As you mentioned, the Swain is coming out here, so it's going to be a test that we'll watch progress further on, as well as one of these I want to say some of the first big patches to come through. As we all know, when the season starts, the first or second patch tends to hit the hardest, and we just watch all these slew of changes come through once again, and we sit there and go, well, all our prep just went out the window, so thank you very much, right? But With that being said, we are looking at day number 7 predictions here. I'm going to start off because it is Top Esports versus Team WE, and these two are going to go at it, hopefully, like cats and dogs. But right now, Yanni, who has been asleep for the last about 20 minutes, is still giving me info stating that he believes that it is going to be TES 3-0 over Team WE. I'm guessing you're lined up with that.
I am absolutely lined up with that. I think, well, obviously this team has gotten a whole bunch of reps. It is their first game of it's both these teams' first game of the LPL split, but Tess got a couple more reps in Demacia Cup. Of course, it's a new patch, so it's not entirely the same game, but they're also better players too. Like we've got world-class players on this team, and on the other side of Team We, they just don't have that same level of firepower. Now, probably the most variability that I expect to see in this series is maybe Team We takes a game off of Top Esports if they hiccup. Again, there's a lot of volatility in this patch. Again, like you said, the first one hits really hard. And so, but yeah, a team like 369, Kanavi coming over from JDG, Cream, Jackie Love, and then Crisp from Weibo. These are some heavy hitting players, some of the best in the LPL. And this is a top tier team. So I expect the 3-0 to come through. And I expect it to be similar to what we saw today between BLG and Edward Gaming.
Ooh, okay. Well, for those that are tuning in, it's gonna be a good time. I mean, listen, we got to make sure all eyes are up, and maybe we do get some of that spice. As you said, it's always the LPL, and there's a reason we call this the aftermath, because we don't know what's gonna happen until we see it with our very own eyes. Ferris, it has been such a pleasure to be here with you. Yanni, I'd shake your hand, but fortunately, it's still slumped over your chair. This has been an amazing experience, and hopefully, we get a little bit more in the future. Ferris, is there anything that you're excited for come the next few weeks of play, or anything that you are possibly going to be looking to criticize as well, maybe watching some of these top teams maybe not perform up to standards or anything of the sort?
Well, I am excited to see how teams adapt through the next week. Of course, things can get sloppy at the start of the season because you're still adapting to how things are played. I'll give the example because the biggest change has been Otacon. It's been the most game warping thing about this patch. I'll compare it to the Grubs, which were added in season 14. Grubs were like so well integrated into the meta and how they were played around as the season progressed. And of course, when we get way ahead to Worlds time, it was down to a science. I can't wait to see Otacon play develop and see how teams combat, especially when a team gets Otacon, how they can try and make it so that it isn't just immediately game over for you. How can you work around this revive and get the best out of it? And so I can't wait to see that. I guess my most anticipated matchup for next week, as we still have one more matchup to go through, which we just talked about, would have to be, I mean, there's Tess and AL, the rematch of the Demacia Cup grand final, but I'm most looking forward to Invictus Gaming versus Ninjas in Pajamas in Group D. Doinby has come back to the LPL after a very long hiatus, the world champ FPX 2019. It's exciting stuff. And then, of course, that super fun IG roster, the Shy, Rookie, and my GOAT, Gala in the bot lane. That's what I'm most excited for. The adaptations, how are things going to change? And maybe we talked about Tank Jace, we talked about some other crazy stuff, but can we stop building a hull breaker on Jinx? Please.
No,
Let's get rid of that too. Let's get rid of that.
You're talking about Jace, but I love the Jinx side. That is the funniest build that I've seen in ages. By the way, if you haven't tried it, please go ahead, hop in the ring, give it a shot, first time ever, and see what your teammates say. It is by far the funniest thing I've seen in a while. But that'll conclude our first ever Aftermath LPL recap for week number 1. Obviously, it was about 6/7 of a recap, but in the future, every episode will be released on Saturday. You're watching this one most likely on Friday when it is released here. And so the hope is to bring a lot more knowledge and information to those that are curious about the LPL and what will happen moving forward. They have a lot of great players, a lot of great teams, and a lot of great action all to follow. There are quite a few LPL English broadcasts as well that you might see Yanni or Ferris even on, so make sure to keep checking them out. Watch the socials, and all our socials are all down below, as you can see, most likely on the X here, and so check them out. Of course, we'll have more in the future as well. Ferris, if you have more socials, we'll make sure to put those out. Yanni will also snooze his way into some awesome more followers and onto a desk most likely. With that being said, thank you very much for tuning in to Aftermath, the LPL recap with Orbital, Ferris, and Yanni, and hopefully some special guests in the future as well. We'll see you all next time.